Welcome to John Carter Stories. The first warning did not come from my wife. It came from the janitor on the 42nd floor. His name was Marcus, and for 11 years he had emptied the trash in my office without ever once interrupting a phone call or lingering anywhere he should not. Men like that see more than executives do. They learn the shape of a building by what people leave behind when they think no one important is watching. It was a Thursday night in October. Portland was dark below us, all wet streets and red brake lights. I was still at my desk, jacket off, tie loosened, studying the quarterly numbers for Calloway Structural Group, the company I had spent 31 years building from a concrete pad south of the river into one of the most respected structural engineering firms on the Pacific coast. Marcus knocked softly on the glass wall of my office after everyone else had gone home. He had the look of a man carrying something that did not belong to him and was glad to be putting it down. "Mr. Calloway," he said quietly, "I found something in the conference room trashed downstairs. I thought maybe it belonged to you." He handed me 3 torn sheets folded together. They had been shredded by hand, not machine. People tear paper themselves when the paper matters enough that a machine feels like too much of a record. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end. And let me know which city you are listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Robert Calloway. I am 66 years old, and I know the difference between bad news and dangerous news by the face of the man delivering it. Marcus looked dangerous. I flattened the pages on my desk. They were printouts of internal transfer authorizations from my own company. My signature was at the bottom of each one. Only it was not my signature. It was close enough to fool a distracted bank officer, perhaps even close enough to fool a man who wanted not to look too hard. But it was not mine. The transfers totaled $2.4 million, routed through vendor settlement accounts to a holding company I had never heard of called Summit Ridge Advisory. "Where did you find these exactly?" I asked. Marcus glanced toward the dark hallway. "Boardroom bin," he said, "under coffee cups and catering trays. I saw your name on them." I thanked him, told him to say nothing to anyone, and watched him leave. Then I locked the office door and read the pages a second time from the beginning. My wife, Eleanor, had asked me that same morning whether I planned to come home for dinner. I had said no, too much work. She had sounded almost pleased by that answer. Eleanor had been my wife for 18 years. Elegant, measured, never loud. She had come into my life 5 years after my first wife, Margaret, passed away, and made everything look orderly again. That was her particular gift. Rooms straightened when she entered them. People lowered their voices. Problems seemed manageable when she was nearby, until you eventually realized the solutions always benefited her first. 6 months earlier, she had persuaded me to bring in an outside strategic advisor to modernize our succession planning. That advisor was a man named Daniel Vance, 43 years old, expensive haircut, soft voice, the kind of man who leaned forward slightly when you spoke, as if every sentence you produced genuinely interested him. I disliked him from the first handshake, which should have made me look considerably harder at why he was in my building. Instead, I let Eleanor laugh off my instincts at dinner. "James," she told me, smiling over her wine glass, "not every polished man is a threat to you." Looking down at those forged transfer pages that October night, I understood 2 things simultaneously. The first was that Daniel Vance had not been brought in to protect my company. The second was that Eleanor had not married me to grow old beside me. I picked up my phone and called home. She answered on the second ring. "James." Her voice was warm, practiced, familiar. "I will be late," I said. "Board issue." "Of course," she said. "Do not work too hard." Then, in the silence just before she hung up, I heard a man's laughter in the background. Low, familiar. Daniel's. I said nothing. Neither did she. But by the time the line went dead, I knew my wife and her partner were not just having an affair. They were already moving my business out from underneath me, piece by piece, while smiling across my dinner table as though I were still the man in charge. I stayed in the office until almost midnight, not because there was work left to do, but because I needed the building empty before I started looking at it differently. A company tells you the truth at night. During the day, there are too many voices inside it, too many people selling confidence. After midnight, all you hear is a machinery, The elevators settling, the vents breathing, the small electrical hum behind walls. That is when you find out whether the structure is genuinely sound or whether someone has been cutting steel in the dark. I took the torn transfer pages and went downstairs to the records room behind finance. The controller had gone home hours earlier. Her assistant, a careful young man named Owen, was still there closing ledgers. He stood when he saw me, which told me he had been taught to fear titles rather than respect them. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I did not know you were still here." "Open the vendor file for Summit Ridge Advisory," I said. His fingers paused over the keyboard for only a second, but I saw it. "They are under restricted review," he said. "By whose authority?" "Mr. Vance requested it." I held up one of the torn pages. "Open them." Owen swallowed, looked at the paper, and sat back down. The file was thin, too thin for the money moving through it. 3 months of consulting invoices, all broad language. Strategic advisory services. Capital restructuring guidance. Executive continuity review. The kind of words designed to sound too expensive to question. Every invoice had been approved through a secondary workflow routed through my office. My approval stamp was there. So was a forged signature. Then I looked at the receiving bank information. Same institution for every payment. Same branch. Same last 4 digits across multiple vendor accounts. Sloppy, once you knew exactly where to look. I asked Owen, who had created the vendor profile. He hesitated again. "Mrs. Calloway, authorizing onboarding packet with Mr. Vance," he said. I nodded as if that were unsurprising. It was not. Eleanor had spent 18 years teaching me to mistake her composure for loyalty. But composure is only surface tension. It tells you nothing about what lies beneath. I took copies of everything. "This conversation did not happen," I said. Owen nodded too quickly. "Of course." And Owen, I added, "If anyone asks whether I was here tonight, you tell them I left at 8. He understood then that this had moved well past accounting and into something closer to survival. "Yes, sir." I drove home at 12:40. The house was dark except for the light above the stove. I always left that one on when she expected me late. A gesture of care or a stage light, depending on the night. I let myself in quietly. Her shoes were at the door. 1 wine glass in the sink. 2 dessert plates in the dishwasher. She had not even bothered to hide the second place setting. I stood there longer than I should have looking at those 2 plates. Not because of the affair. Affairs are ugly, but they are not uncommon. What held me there was the carelessness, the confidence. She had already begun living as if the house, the company, and the story of my removal belonged entirely to her. I went upstairs and found her asleep in our bed, turned toward the empty side, as if she had been waiting for me. I did not wake her. Instead, I went into the dressing room, opened the lower drawer of the walnut cabinet, and took out the black leather notebook I had kept there for years. The real ownership map of Calloway Structural Group, not the public structure, not the board structure. The real one, built by my late attorney after an attempted takeover in 2009. Voting control was not where Eleanor thought it was. It was not where Daniel Vance thought it was either. They had been stealing from the company. Yes, but they planned to take it from me entirely. They were betting their future on a structure they did not fully understand. I stood there in the half-dark with that notebook in my hand, and for the first time that entire night, I felt something cleaner than anger. Not relief, not yet. Something colder. The beginning of a strategy. By morning, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. My wife was working with the man she intended to hand my company to, and both of them believed I was old enough, tired enough, and sufficiently blind not to see the floor giving way beneath my feet. They were wrong. Stay with me, because what I did next is what changes everything. They arrived at 7:12, exactly on time, carrying a bottle of wine neither of them expected to actually drink. People bring wine when they want a scene to look social from the outside. My house was quiet. Lamps on, table set for 3, Margaret silver at each place setting, polished that afternoon for the first time in months. I had cooked nothing elaborate. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans. The kind of meal that keeps conversation fully exposed because there is nothing impressive enough on the table to hide behind. Eleanor kissed my cheek when she came in. Daniel shook my hand. His grip was measured, warm enough to pass for loyalty, cool enough to remain professional. "James," he said, smiling, "I appreciate this." "You should not," I said. "Not yet." He gave the smallest laugh and sat where I indicated. Eleanor watched me more carefully than usual that evening. She had put on the dark blue dress she wore when she wanted to look serious without appearing formal. There are women who dress for rooms. Eleanor dressed for outcomes. We ate the first 10 minutes in near normal conversation. Traffic, the weather, a permit delay on the Vancouver project. Then Daniel set his fork down and folded his hands as though he were chairing a meeting instead of eating my food in my house. "James," he said, "I think we need to talk frankly about the company's future." "Do we?" I asked pleasantly. "Yes." His tone stayed smooth. "You have built something genuinely remarkable, but scale creates risk. Concentrated control creates more. Investors are cautious. Lenders notice succession gaps. If something happened to you tomorrow, the structure would be unstable." Eleanor did not speak. She let him do what she had brought him there to do. He was a cleaner instrument, the blade that smiled while it worked. "Go on," I said. Daniel nodded as if encouraged. "There are ways to protect the company, protect your legacy, and reduce exposure. A transition framework. Shared executive control. Special voting authority moved now. Cleanly, privately, instead of later under pressure." "To you," I said. "Not a question." He held my eyes. "To people positioned to carry it forward." "You," I said again. "And my wife." For the first time that evening, Eleanor moved just slightly. Her wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Daniel did not look at her. "I think," he said carefully, "that Eleanor has the steadiness this next chapter requires." "Ha ha!" I actually laughed then. Not loudly, just enough to break the surface of the room. "Steadiness," I said. "That is an elegant word for what you are describing." Eleanor set down her glass. "James." The tone carried warning. Familiar. Marital. The tone of a woman reminding her husband not to embarrass himself in front of company. I had obeyed that tone before. Too many times, probably. "No," I said quietly. "You do not get to use my first name like a sedative tonight." Daniel leaned back, not in defensiveness, but repositioning himself. "If this is about trust," I said, "it is about forged transfers. It is about shell vendors with no legitimate purpose. It is about the fact that you spent this afternoon in my archive room, reading records you thought would show you how to finish taking my company." The silence that followed hit the table and stayed there. Eleanor looked at Daniel then, and in that one brief glance I saw the entire architecture of their arrangement laid bare. Not romance, not even mutual admiration, just coordination, cold, practical, and genuinely without sentiment. He recovered first. "You are making accusations you cannot support," he said. "That was true yesterday," I replied. I reached to the sideboard and brought back the folder I had placed there before they arrived. I laid one copy in front of Daniel, another in front of Eleanor. It stopped being true this morning. Daniel did not open his folder. Eleanor did. She was always the faster one. Her eyes moved once across the labeled tabs, and the color left her face, so gradually it might have escaped a less attentive man. External audit notice. Emergency board review. Fraud event trigger. "What did you do?" she asked very quietly. I sat back down. "I stopped being tired," I said. Then the doorbell rang. None of us moved at first. We all knew in our different ways that whatever came through that door next would divide this particular evening from the rest of all our lives. When it rang a second time, Daniel stood. I said, "Sit down." He did not. That was a precise moment. I knew he was finally afraid. The doorbell rang a third time. Not impatient. Certain. I stood, walked to the entryway, and opened the front door. Gerald Morton came in first, still wet from the rain outside, followed by my attorney Sandra Hale, carrying a leather briefcase, and two men from corporate investigations I recognized by face if not by name. Behind them was Detective Paul Garrett from the Financial Crimes Division, broad-shouldered, completely expressionless, the kind of man who looks built for exactly this purpose. Gerald did not waste time on greetings. "Good," he said, looking past me toward the dining room. "You started without us." Daniel had gone very still when they entered. Eleanor stayed seated, but only because she understood that movement now would look exactly like guilt. Sandra set her briefcase on the sideboard, opened it, and removed 3 sealed envelopes. "Mr. Vance," she said, "effective immediately, your access to all discretionary vendor authorizations, archive records, and executive signing privileges has been suspended pending formal review." She laid the first envelope in front of him. "Mrs. Calloway, this is notice that all marital claims involving corporate governance, trust-linked holdings, and succession exposure are now under legal protection and entirely outside your authority to influence." She placed a second envelope before Eleanor. Then she turned to me. "Robert, this one requires your signature." I opened the third envelope. Fraud event trigger. Emergency control confirmation. Temporary executive continuity authority reassigned to Gerald Morton until the full board convened at 9 the following morning. I signed it without sitting down. Daniel finally spoke. "This is completely insane," he said. Gerald looked at him with open contempt. "No," he said. "Insane was thinking you could route money through shell vendors, forge internal approvals, and then pressure an ownership transfer before anyone who actually built this company noticed what they were smelling." Eleanor found her voice. "You have no proof I was involved in any of this." Sandra slid a smaller packet across the table. "Messages recovered from your private email account. Calendar alignments with vendor approvals. Draft language for a capacity narrative regarding Robert. Margin notes in your own handwriting on trust exposure clauses. Would you like me to continue?" Eleanor did not touch the packet. Daniel did what weak men often do when the structure around them finally collapses. He tried to save himself by narrowing the crime. This was a liquidity strategy. He said, "Aggressive perhaps, but not criminal." Detective Garrett answered him. "Then you will have no difficulty explaining the forged approval chains, the undeclared beneficial ownership, and the transfer schedule tied to a proposed control event." He stepped forward and set a final document on the table. I knew what was before I looked. A copy of the draft transition agreement Daniel had prepared but not yet executed. On paper, it framed my retirement as entirely voluntary. In practice, it would have stripped me of voting control, isolated key trust assets, and handed operational authority to Daniel with Eleanor as domestic conservator of the personal estate. They had not just wanted the company. They had wanted me alive long enough to sign away my resistance, then irrelevant enough not to matter afterward. Eleanor said it was precautionary. "Of course she did," I said. My voice surprised even me. "Calm, flat, final. Predators always call the first cut a precaution." Daniel looked up at me then, and for the first time all evening, I saw something real on his face underneath everything he had taught himself to project. He said my name, Robert, just my name, like a man reaching for the edge of something already falling away from him. I did not help him. Some collapses need to finish before anything true can be built in their place. The next development is the one that finished them both completely. Stay right there. Detective Garrett asked both of them to surrender their phones. Daniel hesitated. Eleanor did not. That single difference told me who had truly been driving this in the beginning. When the detective held out his hand the second time, Daniel placed his phone in it and stared at the table as if the wood grain might offer some different future if he looked at it long enough. Outside, the rain moved steadily against the windows. Inside, my wife and the man she had chosen to replace me with sat in my dining room beneath the pendant lights she had picked out 2 years earlier, and the life they had been quietly building behind my back began at last to come apart in the open. What finished them was not the forged transfers. It was not the shell vendors. It was not even the draft agreement they had prepared to strip me clean while calling it succession planning. It was a voice recording on Eleanor's second phone. Detective Garrett found it before midnight. She had recorded herself, because people like her always believe they may need leverage later, even against the people they are currently conspiring with. In the recording, her voice was calm, almost bored. Daniel asked what would happen if I resisted. Eleanor said, "Then we stop trying to persuade him, and we start documenting decline. Missed appointments, confusion, isolation. He signs less frequently. We push harder. If necessary, we move him somewhere managed and allow the board to grow accustomed to not seeing him." Daniel asked, "And if he changes the trust again?" She laughed. He will not. Robert still believes loyalty is a structure. That is precisely why this will work. Detective Garrett played that recording once in my dining room. No one spoke while it ran. Weeping, not from me, not that night, but I will not pretend that hearing my wife's voice describe my planned disappearance in a tone of mild administrative efficiency did not reach something deep. When it ended, Daniel looked at Eleanor the way men look at fires they believe they could control. That was the first genuinely honest expression I had seen on his face. He had gone into this for money. She had gone into it for something far colder. There is a real difference between those two things. Men sometimes recover from greed. They do not recover from learning they partnered with contempt. Sandra did not waste a silence. She said, tapping the phone on the table, constitutes conspiracy, coercive control, attempted fraudulent incapacity, and sufficient evidence to freeze every corporate pathway either of you has touched. Daniel stood then, not in outrage but in panic. Detective Garrett told him to sit. He did not. The detective sat him down with one firm hand on his shoulder, hard enough to conclude the discussion entirely. Eleanor never moved. She sat at the side of my table, spine straight, hands folded, and looked at the wall as though all of this were a minor administrative inconvenience she was being subjected to through no fault of her own. I had loved that woman for 18 years, or believed I had. Love is sometimes just trust with better lighting. By 1:30 in the morning, both of them were gone. Not convicted yet, not finished entirely, but taken out of my house under legal restraint, their devices bagged, their access revoked, their certainty broken into pieces on my dining room floor. Gerald stayed until nearly 2 in the morning, going through the next day's board sequence with Sandra, while I stood at the kitchen counter pouring untouched coffee down the sink. When they finally left, the house felt larger than it had in years. Not emptier, just mine again. If you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, still wondering whether you imagine it all or whether the people around you are exactly who your instincts said they were, keep going, because what happened at that board table the next morning is where the entire thing becomes permanent. The board met at 9 the following morning. Daniel Vance did not attend. His attorney did. It made no difference. Gerald laid out the audit trail. Sandra laid out the legal exposure. The investigators laid out the device extractions already in process. 3 directors who had nodded along at Daniel's presentations for the better part of a year discovered all at once that polish is not competence and confidence is not governance. By 11, he was terminated for cause. By noon, every account tied to the shell vendors was frozen. By 3, the bank that had been so eager to process his advisory structures was answering questions under subpoena. Eleanor moved faster than he did after the board meeting. She filed for divorce the following morning, probably hoping to reach a financial settlement before the criminal side of the case fully developed. Sandra answered with filings of her own that closed that door so firmly, I almost felt something for the clerk who had to carry the paperwork across town. Almost. The criminal case took 7 months. The divorce took 11. The betrayal took longer than either of them. In court, Daniel tried to position himself as a consultant, simply following my wife's instructions. Eleanor tried to present herself as a concerned spouse reacting appropriately to an aging husband's instability. Then the messages came in. Then the calendar notes. Then the transfers. Then the recording. Then the handwritten margin notes on the drafting capacity packet, where she had written in blue ink, reduce access gradually so he adapts. There are sentences no jury forgives. That was one of them. Daniel took a plea arrangement before the verdict. 8 years, barred from financial services for life. Whatever that means to a man who never had a genuine profession so much as a practice method. Eleanor took it all the way to verdict and lost everything. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted unlawful deprivation of protected assets. The judge said she had not simply tried to steal from her husband. She had tried to erase him in careful stages and called the process care. That line made the newspapers. It deserved to. I did not attend the final sentencing for either of them. By then I had heard enough of my own life translated into legal language to last me the remainder of it. Instead, I drove out to the old fabrication yard south of the river, the place where Calloway Structural Group had begun, before offices, before boardrooms, before polished advisors and wives who learned the vocabulary concerned more fluently than the language of love. The yard was empty now except for one rusting gantry frame and the concrete pad where we used to stage steel before dawn. I stood there in the cold and thought about what they had actually failed to understand. Not my age, not my habits, not even the structure of the company they had spent months mapping. What they had fundamentally misunderstood was endurance. People like Eleanor and Daniel assume a man is easiest to remove after he has built something significant because they believe the building used everything he had. They assume nothing remains underneath the title, the house, the accounts, the routines. They think if they strip enough layers away, the man will agree to disappear because he no longer remembers what he was before he owned things. Tell me in the comments if you have ever had someone underestimate you that completely. And if you have dealt with something similar, if someone used your trust against you while calling it care, share your story. You are not alone in this. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. They were wrong about me. Before Calloway Structural Group, I was a welder working in winter rain. Before that, a laborer carrying rebar uphill with gloves full of water. Before that, a broke young husband sharing a one-bedroom apartment with a woman named Margaret who believed I would become more than I looked like at the time. I was not made by the company. I built it. That distinction matters more than most people understand. The company survived. Leaner, cleaner, and considerably less interested in people who arrive with expensive opinions about what it should become. I handed daily operations to Gerald for a year, then brought in 2 people from inside the organization who had earned their way upward without performance or theater. I sold the large house because there was too much false history embedded in the walls. I bought a smaller place on the river with 1 floor, good light, and no room for anyone whose primary interest was managing me. Sometimes people ask me whether I hate Eleanor. I do not. Hate is attachment wearing armor. I know exactly what she was and what she was not. That is enough. What I carry now is something colder and far more useful. Clarity. The final thing I will tell you is this. When betrayal arrives, dress well and tells you it is protecting your future, do not argue first. Do not explain yourself. Do not confuse good manners with personal safety. Check the paperwork. Check the signatures. Check who benefits most directly from your confusion. Then move before they finish teaching the room how to speak about you, as though you are already gone. My name is Robert Calloway. They tried to take my business, my name, and the last real authority I had over my own life. In the end, they left with court orders, criminal records, and a particular ruin that belongs only to people who mistake someone's patience for weakness. I left with the company, the truth, and something worth considerably more than revenge. I left with the knowledge that when the time finally came, they had to speak louder than I did, and they still lost.